Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating piece of source material. We're going to be looking at one of the most widely quoted and honestly, deeply misunderstood concepts in all of biblical literature. Yeah, we're talking about the idea of being unequally yoked. We're going to dig into the literal dirt, the ancient agricultural roots of this phrase, and the real history behind it. And I promise you, it's going to completely shift how you view this ancient text. So let's just dive right in.
Okay, so if you've spent literally any time around Christian culture, you have absolutely heard this phrase, "Be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers." It's from 2 Corinthians 6:14. Very famous verse, and almost entirely modern culture uses this as the ultimate strict rulebook for dating and marriage. Like, that's the whole shebang. But taking a closer look at the source text reveals something totally surprising.
Section 1. More than marriage, the broader context. Right out of the gate, the core argument we need to understand is this. Marriage actually isn't Paul's immediate subject here, like at all. Now, does marriage fall under this principle? Sure, absolutely. But it is neither the original nor the exclusive application. So assuming this is just a wedding verse totally misses the broader, much more intense point the author was originally trying to hit home with his audience in Corinth. Section 2. Anatomy of a yoke. Agricultural roots. To really get what this text is saying, we've got to time travel back to the ancient farming world for a minute. The exact phrase, unequally yoked, only shows up this one single time in the entire New Testament. It comes from a really unique Greek verb, heterozugio. Now, literally, that translates to be yoked together with one of a different kind. It mashes up heteros, meaning different, and zugos, meaning yoke. This whole image is strictly agricultural. We're talking literal physical farming equipment here. And that brings us to a crucial point. What does a yoke actually do, right? A yoke doesn't just mean two animals happen to be standing next to each other in a pasture. No, it is a massive, heavy wooden beam that locks two animals together so completely that they have no choice but to walk, pull, and labor as one unit. It forces them to share their strength, their direction, their purpose, and their movement. So the original text isn't talking about casual contact. It's talking about binding partnerships that literally dictate the trajectory of your life. And this brilliantly shows where the metaphor even comes from. Think about the Old Testament law from Deuteronomy 22:10. It commanded, "Thou shalt not plow with an ox and an ass together." Ancient Jewish tradition knew exactly why this was so practical. An ox and a donkey, they have totally different strengths, different strides, wildly different temperaments, and different purposes. If you actually try to yoke them together, what happens? The stronger ox ends up injuring the donkey, and the donkey just frustrates the ox. Honestly, neither of them can get the job done. So you see, these ancient agricultural rules, they weren't saying one animal was evil and the other was good. It wasn't about that. It was just the reality that they were never designed to pull the same yoke. In these ancient texts, you see similar laws, like against mixing seeds or mixing fabrics. These were symbolic laws teaching a much deeper lesson. Distinctions matter. Not because differences are inherently bad, but because, well, confusion destroys purpose. Section 3. Isolation versus influence. The Christian tension. This brings up a pretty massive tension in the text. Look at the literary context around this famous verse. The author just cranks up the intensity using 5 rapid-fire rhetorical questions. He contrasts righteousness with lawlessness, light with darkness, Christ with Belial, believer with unbeliever, and the temple with idols. Now, these aren't just, quirky differences in personality. These represent fundamentally incompatible systems and ultimate bottom-line allegiances.
And the absolute climax of those questions lands on the imagery of the temple. The text declares its readers to be the temple of the living God. Now, in ancient Israel, the temple was God's dwelling place. It was never, ever joined with pagan worship. This is a direct callback to ancient prophecies about leaving the corrupted city of Babylon. The really crucial takeaway here is that this kind of separation, it's entirely a matter of consecration and spiritual loyalty. It's about belonging wholly to God. It has absolutely nothing to do with human superiority. But this raises a huge practical question, right? Does this mean you have to just cut off contact with anyone who thinks differently than you? The emphatic answer from the source material is no. We really have to separate a binding union from casual contact. A binding union forces you into a shared direction, a shared pace, and a shared ultimate destination. Casual contact? That's just interacting, eating together, hanging out.
The text actually points to an incredibly powerful historical example. Jesus himself. He constantly associated with outsiders, ate with sinners, and literally touched lepers. But here's the key. He touched lepers without getting infected by leprosy. His influence always flowed outward, never inward. The text fully expects you to interact with the wider world. Otherwise, sharing your faith would literally be impossible. The warning is strictly about joining a yoke where the influence pulls you away from your core purpose.
Section 4. Modern partnerships. Binding unions today.
So how in the world does this ancient farming rule apply to us today? Well, the principle kicks in wherever people become spiritually or morally joined. And yeah, for sure, marriage is probably the strongest earthly yoke, right? Because two people are literally merging their lives. But it's so much more than that. It includes business partnerships, where owners have to share ethics, finances, and direction. It includes religious alliances, ministry partnerships, and those really deep covenantal friendships. Those are all modern-day yokes.
To really emphasize the power of these kinds of friendships, we can look over at Proverbs 13:20. It says, "He that walketh with wise men shall be wise, but a companion of fools shall be destroyed." I think this just brilliantly illustrates that we are talking about relationships that possess the profound power to actually shape your identity, your values, your core convictions, and ultimately the entire direction of your life. So the crucial point drawn from that proverb is this: walking eventually becomes becoming. Think about that for a second. Whoever you allow to step inside your yoke and steer your direction will ultimately shape your destination. You simply cannot walk in a binding partnership without absorbing the pace and the path of the one you're yoked to. It's just human nature. Section 5. Choosing your yoke. Who shapes your life?
And here is where we hit the most profound philosophical argument of this whole concept. The text highlights this delicate, constant tension required in this worldview. On one side, believers are sent into the world. That requires active presence and real love. But on the flip side, they are commanded not to become like the world, which demands zero compromise or assimilation. So, living this out well means walking a tightrope, maintaining a faithful presence without ever surrendering your core values. Which brings us right back to our opening quote. Paul says, "Be ye not unequally yoked." Now, standing on its own, it sounds like a really strict limitation, right? A boundary just meant to keep you away from other people. But we actually have to set this up against another highly famous quote from these texts. Because immediately alongside Paul's warning, we find Jesus' incredibly famous invitation in Matthew 11:29, "Take my yoke upon you." The contrast here is just striking. You've got one verse saying, "Do not be yoked," while the other is explicitly saying, "Be yoked to me." And this pairing presents a truly brilliant theological insight. The reality is, one yoke always replaces another. Human beings were fundamentally created and designed to pull under someone's direction. The question isn't whether or not you're going to wear a yoke in this life. You are, for sure. Doesn't that completely shift the perspective? The text never actually commands its readers to sit around judging whether outsiders are worthy of their friendship. Not at all. Instead, it challenges people to evaluate what their partnerships demand of them. Evaluate commitments, not just people. The ultimate warning is simply this: do not bind your life in a way that your primary loyalty gets compromised by a competing direction. Which leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative question to chew on. Whose yoke shapes your life? Every relationship you have carries some influence, but only a select few actually hold a yoke. Whatever or whoever shares the deepest control over your direction will undoubtedly shape your final destination. It's just a fascinating look at how an ancient agricultural rule still perfectly describes the mechanics of human allegiance today. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning what drives your direction.